All right, guys, hello there, and welcome to the last week of our normal classes. The past couple weeks were insane and worked out in a very unpredictable fashion, but hopefully this week works out a little bit more normally. There is one curveball right from the get go, but I think you'll like this curveball. You'll notice on your syllabus that there is no discussion for this week, and so you've got nothing to kick in. Oh, do you want to see what I'm up to here? Here we go. You can take a look too. Can you say hi?
Hi.
We're talking to my class right now. You say, hi, Daddy's class.
Hi, Daddy's class.
And it's okay that you jumped up here too, because today I'm going to be talking to my class about children's media. What's your favorite TV show? Do you have a favorite TV show?
Yeah, my favorite is Scooby-Dooby-Doo.
You like Scooby-Dooby-Doo best?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very good pick. Why do you like Scooby-Dooby-Doo best?
Because I like the slime monster because he's very scary.
Because the slime monster is very scary? And you like being scared?
Yeah, I like being scared.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna keep talking to my class, okay? And you go ahead and you go play. All right. We're gonna talk about why you like Scooby-Doo. All right. Well, with that interesting transition, um, we're going to talk a little bit about why we study children and how we study children. And it's actually a very complicated group. Now, if you're a scientist and you're looking to perform some experiments involving children, you're going to find that you have a lot more hurdles to jump through. The IRB is much less forgiving when it comes to conducting studies involving children. Now, that said, they're a valuable group to conduct some studies with. We're interested in them because children are very malleable. Children are formed by small things, and small things can inform their behavior. We do a lot of studying on them, even though it is more difficult and even though it does require some more hoops to jump through. And we're going to be really looking at two major topics today. Let's say three. We're going to look at three major topics today. First off, we're going to look at children as an audience and the different ways that we can kind of consider how children operate as an audience. Then we're going to talk a little bit about displacement. Displacement is an idea that's a matter of concern for kids. The basic idea is that maybe there's nothing wrong at all with watching TV. Maybe there's nothing wrong at all with consuming media as a child. The question mark is, what is it that you're not doing while you are doing that, right? The worry of displacement theorists is that children are sacrificing other things that they need more or just as much. Then we're going to look at some of the typical cognitive, affective, and behavioral type stuff that we always look at when we're doing any sort of communication research, but especially what we looked at last week with, for example, violence. All right, so let's start with children as an audience, okay? We're going to break them into two major systems of consideration. First off, you've got Piaget and you've got Kohlberg. The way Piaget thinks about children is he thinks about them in terms of their cognitive development, right? How they think and what they think about and how they process information and learn about the world around them. Important stuff, right? Then we're going to think about Kohlberg, who's more concerned with how their sense of morality develops. And of course, this is a major topic of concern when we're looking at any kind of media. You know, this is why people get worried about what their children watch. It's going to inform their behaviors later in life. So let's start off with Piaget and his cognitive development theory. He would break children into four different categories. The first category would be sensory motor. That's what you're in from birth until you're 2 years old. Then pre-operational from 2 to 7, concrete operational from 7 to 11, and formal operational from 11 years on till death. Definitely know those breakdowns. We're going to talk about each of them in a little bit of detail. Now, I'm actually hoping that I can show you some additional videos. Like I said, I still don't have access to my normal editing rig, so it's a little hard for me to bring in outside videos. But I've got some cool things with my kids because apparently I'm that kind of dad. where they nicely illustrate some of these concepts. So if I at all can do it, I'm gonna do it for you guys. Okay, I'll do my best. Anyway, we're with sensory motor for birth to 2 years. The way that kids process things is very different, right? First off, they don't know that objects exist outside themselves. That's why you can draw a freaked out response from a kid by covering up your face and going, peekaboo, right? Because as far as they're concerned, you've just disappeared and then reappeared, and their minds are blown, right? They can't remember things exist when they can't be seen. As far as they're concerned, anything that's outside of their perception immediately disappears. And isn't that kind of an interesting parallel for how we kind of think about things too, right? Sometimes one common objection, for example, that I've heard with communication research is, well, how are you supposed to study something like entertainment, for example? I'm an entertainment researcher. How can you know how entertained somebody is when it's something that's immaterial, right? And to some extent, that's true, right? Like, how am I supposed to study happiness, right? Happiness, if I take someone's brain and I start cutting it up, I'm never going to get to a molecule of happiness, right? There's not ever going to be something in there that I can pick out and say is happiness. And yet, happiness is a thing, right? Presumably all of you have been happy. There's 30 of you. So there's a 1 in 15 chance that one of you has not experienced happiness, because statistically 1 in 400 people is a psychopath and is incapable of experiencing any kind of emotion. But statistically, it's likely that all of you have experienced the emotion of happiness and recognize that it isn't in fact a thing. And if you happen to be the odd psychopath, you'll just have to take my word for it that happiness is a thing. Happiness is a thing, and and it's quantifiable even, right? Like, I can identify that there are times in my life where I have been more happy than other times in my life, and then there have been times in my life where I haven't been happy at all, right? I wasn't happy at all when I didn't have internet access in Japan. That made me unhappy. But then I was very happy when I would go to like a yatai and have yaki ramen or haruman or something, you know? So I definitely know that it is a thing, but I can't observe it directly. So we use indirect markers to observe these things. The kids haven't figured out yet that there are certain indirect markers, right? An indirect marker for them might be the hands in front of the face. Because you can see that I've got hands, you know that there must be a person there, right? They're still working that part of it out. They're also working out this idea that one thing leads to another, that there are causal relationships, right? My little girl used to bop herself in the nose sometimes, and when she would bop herself in the nose and it would hurt, she would glare at me and be all pissed off with me because all of a sudden she was hurt, and there I was, and she couldn't understand that it was her hitting herself that was causing her to be in pain. It must be this other guy's fault. So anyway, that's where they're at. And while they're in this sensory motor stage, they're discovering the world around them. They're figuring things out. They're learning language, and gradually they're taking on a fuller understanding of the world. When they watch TV in the sensory motor stage, they're going to mostly get things like sights and colors and sounds and voices and music out of it. They're not going to get so much story. And in fact, they're not going to get any story. And in fact, when it boils right down to it, they're not even going to get concrete images. Kids in the sensory motor stage oftentimes don't have fully developed eyesight. And so they're going to see globular things. Even once their eyesight becomes defined, they're still going to be trying to figure out, okay, what actually constitutes a boundary of something. And so when they watch TV, they might not see clearly delineated boundaries the way that we might, right? But when you look at the screen and I'm talking to you, you see a talking head, right? But that's not really what's on the screen when you think about it. What's really on the screen is a mishmash of colors that are all actually together in two-dimensional space. A kid is going to perceive that more accurately than we do, because our brains are filling in certain gaps in order for you to see the talking head. They're going to see it more as it actually is, this this moving mishmash of images. So that's where you're at in sensory motor. With preoperational, you're starting to develop some logic. You're starting to develop your reasoning skills, and you're starting to kind of figure things out a little bit. You can begin to utilize symbols. Now, when I'm talking about symbols here, unfortunately, because of the really abbreviated nature of this class, we didn't get a chance to talk in depth about what I mean by symbols. Symbols we're using semantically here, which means words, for example, right? A symbol is anything that indirectly refers to something else. If I say the word dog is not, necessarily tied to the image of dog. If I said dog to somebody in Japan, it would mean nothing, right? Because the word dog is not fundamentally a dog. Now, if I showed them a picture of a dog, that would be closer to it, right? And even there, though, it wouldn't be a one-to-one type of thing. A kid is starting at 2 to 7 in preoperational is beginning to really grasp how to utilize these symbols, right? They can start to make guesses about motives. Why did someone do something, right? If you've got a child who's below the age of 2, punishment is virtually useless, right? The only thing that punishment is good for is basically like raw compliance or conditioning even, right? They aren't going to be able to understand why you got angry at them when they did something naughty. They haven't figured out motives yet. When you're preoperational, though, you start to figure that out. They're able to group things into relationships, right? Mommy and daddy are family. It starts to really come in preoperational. You can say that TV shows are scary TV shows, for example, right? And you can start to make picks, right? A kid in the sensory motor stage wouldn't have been able to answer the question that my 3-year-old just answered. I asked her, why is it that Scooby-Doo is your favorite? And she says, well, it's because it's scary. I like the slime monster, and it's a spooky show, right? That's a logical deduction. Why is it that she likes it? Well, this is an aspect of it that she likes. And so when you're at this age, you start to really pull short stories out of your television viewing experience, especially if it's cartoons. And you start to really identify characters, right? She can tell Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, from Velma, from Daphne, from Fred, and she can pick out characters that she really likes, like the slime monster from episode 1 of the new Scooby-Doos, which I have now seen 30,000 times. All right. After pre-operational, you go to concrete operational. This means that now you're starting to really think about the world in a more formal, not formal, I don't want to use that term because we're moving on to formal operational. You're thinking about the world in a more solid type of way, right? Things are real to you now. You start to develop classification skills. That means that you can identify Scooby-Doo and you can say this is a cartoon that falls into a children's cartoon type of genre, right? You're able to identify that stuff. You start to think about what you might prefer to do. You're able to make judgments on, I can't do this so that I can do this. You're able to think things through. It's difficult sometimes with my daughter because I know how her brain functions right now, and there are some things that I would like to be angry at her about. And I can't be because I know that it happened because she just didn't think it through. When she dumps out her milk on the table, she didn't necessarily know that taking the cup and slowly turning it and pouring it like that was going to result in the table becoming wet and Daddy being really annoyed, right? Later on, that's actually something that comes a little bit later when you can think about things and you can say, okay, if I take this cup and I tip it, then the milk is going to fall on the table and it's going to make my father upset, right? That's a mental recreation. You've thought that whole process through. So, but that comes later. And so since you can do those mental recreations, planning starts to become a thing, and scheming starts to become a thing, which of course you can really see with 7 to 11-year-olds. But also with that comes perspective taking, right? You can imagine what it would be like to be somebody else. I can't tell Bryn, imagine how daddy feels when you poke your finger in his eye, right? Like, if I were to tell her that, she'd be like, I don't know, does your finger feel squishy? She's not able to take somebody else's perspective on these things. I have to wait until she's 7 before she's really going to be able to understand, oh, yeah, if I stick my finger in daddy's eye, that must hurt, right? I can tell her that right now, and she'll understand what I'm telling her, and she'll probably stop doing it even, and she'd respond to punishment in that regard. But she won't be able to take my perspective in advance. And then the final stage is called formal operational. Now, that's more abstract thinking, right? You're able to think about things like good and evil. You're able to classify actions as morally upright or not morally upright. You're able to think about the universe in terms of mathematics, right? You're able to think about things in much more abstract terms. And so when you're, oh, I never talked about TV for the last one. For concrete operational, generally speaking, you start to really like humor and you really start to like simple problem solution type storylines. When you get to formal operational, though, you like much more complicated stuff, generally speaking. You like mystery shows or crime stories. You like sci-fi, which of course is my bag, right? And shows about relationships or shows about complex social problems, right? An 11-year-old is never going to be interested in Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, right? It deals with way too complicated issues, but an adult is probably going to be interested in it, unless you just don't like fun. I really like that show. By the way, that's something about persuasion. If you want to persuade someone very easily, if you're preparing a persuasive speech, for example, the first thing you ought to do is look and see what comedians have said on the topic, because comedy tears down a lot of barriers when it comes to persuasion. It makes you more likable, for one, so that adds to your credibility, but also it makes it more difficult to argue against somebody. And so even within your own mind, it makes it more difficult to argue against somebody. So they are forced to consider the merits of your argument right away. So humor can be actually a very, very, very useful tool. Anyway, we digress. So let's move on to Kohlberg and his stages of moral development. Now, his are much broader, and in fact, the third one, he would say, not everyone ever even gets to. So most people only have 2, and a few people have the third one. His moral development stages would be pre-conventional, which is 2 to 9 years old, right? That would be when you start to figure out, that punishment and reward can do certain things for you, that you've figured out means to an end, and you're deciding what's good and bad based on whether you anticipate being punished or rewarded for doing it. Then he's got conventional. That's from 10 years old to mostly death, for most of society, and that's where you say, okay, there are things that I do that are good, and it's good to follow rules, and society is something that deserves to be propped up. And that's conventional. And then for some people, there's post-conventional, and that happens in your 20s, and not to everybody. And that would say there are certain values that transcend simple obedience to rules, right? There's universal ethics out there. There's things out there which can be good, right? Now, I think actually I've already told you about norms. Yeah, I think I've already told you about norms. We won't revisit norms right now. Okay, cool. So that's kids. So just as a quick kind of recap, let's think about what it is that kids must get when they watch TV. If you're an infant and you're watching TV, you're going to pick up on a few sounds of words, right? You're going to figure out a couple of objects. Gradually, those are going to form for you. You're going to figure out that there are tasks out there. If you're a toddler, you're going to gradually pick up language and language structure. You're going to figure out that there are certain ways that we should behave that are normal and normative. And you're going to really focus on how things look over what things say. You're going to, if you're a grade schooler, you're going to pay a lot of attention to advertising, because advertising is highly normative, right? It tells you what it is that is desirable in your life. But you're also going to get really into stories and into the roles that people play. And then teenagers are going to be more interested in social relations, and they're going to use media as a way to begin exploring more difficult topics like sexuality and that sort of thing. So that's how it goes. Now, we see something interesting which takes place with if you allow kids to basically decide how much media they're going to consume. You're going to see, as you might expect, sort of a linear trajectory upward, right? So at 6 months old, they're going to watch about an hour and a half of TV a day. At 5 years old, they're going to be watching about 2.5 hours of TV per day. At 11 years old, they're going to be watching about 4 hours of TV a day. So that's a linear relationship, right? The older that they get, the more that they're watching. Right? We talked about linear relationships earlier. Then what happens, though, is we end up with a curvilinear relationship. Because when you hit a certain age, actually specifically 14, it starts to taper off. At 15 years, you're only watching 2 to 3 hours of TV a day, and you actually end up with a little bit more taper on the end of that as they get a little bit older. So your viewing habits actually decrease. You could put this into a number of paradigms. If you're going to go uses and grats, for example, you would say television and media in general are more necessary for younger audiences, because they're trying to establish norms about their world. They're trying to understand their world, and media gives them a large amount of exposure so that they can learn really rapidly about these sort of things. But once you hit a certain age, namely 14, you don't need that stuff so much anymore, and so you start watching it less because you have fewer needs, and so it gratifies fewer needs. We talked a little bit about displacement before. Once again, displacement hypothesis just says that media use reduces the chance of doing something else. So when you're doing an activity away from home, if you're playing soccer with your friends, then clearly you're not watching TV, right? Media competes with other things for your time and for your attention. You can only really give your attention to one thing at a time. Incidentally, there's pretty good research out there that indicates that multitasking is completely mythical, that nobody can multitask, and that all you can really do is switch between tasks really quickly. I partially agree with that. However, I actually think that your body is very capable of doing things on its own. So, like, for example, I had a professor who could write in Greek with his right hand and in Hebrew with his left hand. And he would start in the middle like this, and he would write different things going opposite directions across the board. It was really impressive. It was a great parlor trick, right? And I've seen people perform independent tasks with each hand while carrying on a conversation with me, right? Now, if you're strictly a cognitive person, and I used to be, if you're strictly a cognitive person, you would say, well, they're switching between these tasks ridiculously quickly, so that they are capable of making it look like it's happening simultaneously. I'm just going to tell you, the mental demands of writing in a foreign language are too severe for you to be mentally switching between those two things. I actually would make a case that you have a degree of mental memory, or of muscle memory, that operates on a different level, that's precognitive or subcognitive even, where you can just do it. There are just certain things that I can do without thinking too much about them. When I'm doing hand motions, for example, doing this requires no cognitive effort on my part, and I'm capable of talking to you while I'm doing it. I can think creatively about different topics while I'm doing this. Why? Because this requires no cognitive effort. If I rehearse an action enough times, maybe I can make it become as simple as this. Anyway, that's a total digression. So to sum up everything that we've talked about here, and what you're going to find on your quiz for this week. First off, know the audiences of children. There is no such thing as a children's audience, right? You can't say, I'm making this program for children. If you're going to make children's programming, actually consider Piaget and Kohlberg's breakdowns, because it's going to inform how you craft your show. That's why certain shows are very surprising for why they hit, right? Teletubbies. Adults hate Teletubbies, and kids love it. Take a look at what we've talked about up above, and you'll see. Actually, why don't we do this for fun? If you are worried that you've missed a discussion, or if you'd like extra credit, you can do a discussion for this week. I'll put in a discussion section for this week. Your discussion can be, why is it that children in the lowest age groups would love Teletubbies, while as children in higher age groups and adults would hate it, right? And use Piaget and Kohlberg to justify the answer. Sound good? I'll give you extra credit for it, or I'll cover over a missed assignment for that one. Well, children constitute a lot of audiences, in other words, and children use television as a window on the world. They use it to learn about things. Ultimately, kids are scientists. And children's TV has a lot of content that gives us reason for concern. All right, those are the takeaways for this lesson. I'll get this one uploaded, and we'll move on to the next topic.